Okay, we talked about some of the early mathematics of a business. Are there enough customers? Can you make any money at it? Some of this is more, I'd say, easier to understand and to get information on in a small business versus a startup because, as I said in an earlier session, small businesses typically have a known business model. You can join a trade association of landscapers or bookkeepers or car washes or donut shops or whatever else you might do, business to business services as well, where you can get information on what the standard numbers look like so that you can compare your actual to what, say, are the average for a shop or a store or a business the size that you're working on. And that gets me to one of the earliest things you need to consider, and then we're going to sort of run down the bullets of the headings or the kinds of aspects of business that you're going to need to know something about. We're only going to speak briefly about them in this early session, this introductory class, because there's only so much time. But we will have some resources in the downloadable workbook or handouts for this class, and the Bank Street Center will be offering classes pretty much specific on each of these areas. And feel free to choose whichever ones you need and ignore the rest. So the first one I want to talk about is this mentoring, networking. Being in the industry is sometimes referred to. Almost all industries these days have an association so that you can understand, compare, go to meetings, read trade magazines. A good friend of mine has a packaging supply business, and there are a number of magazines that he gets every month, and now there are websites and chats so that other people in the packaging business can sort of share ideas, lament problems, brainstorm, hear about new products, etc. Industry trends, things that you couldn't really afford the time or the money to gather on your own. It would be too narrow. So you really want to find out what's going on in your proposed industry. In fact, part of your due diligence process that you're going to use to decide which business area to go into might include logging on to a number of these sites, joining some of these sites, reading these trade magazines, so that you can get a sense of what the flavor of the industry is about. Is it a growing industry? Is it a shrinking industry? Why is it shrinking? Do you think you've got some solution to the shrinking industry? Or maybe you could move the industry to some area they have not previously considered. That's called, among some academics, the blue ocean strategy. And we'll talk about that in future courses. So once you've got this network down, and even after you start a business, you're going to want to talk to peers, talk to people in the same industry so you can get ideas and share ideas. Now, obviously, in some level, you're competitors, but others, it's sort of nice to have someone who understands your business. I know, for example, in the packaging business that I mentioned a few minutes ago, that the owner of that company, when he runs short of a particular product, calls one of his competitors and he buys it from them or borrows, X units of product from them and replaces it when he gets his order. So those are the kind of relationships that can be useful in a small business. But let's get down to the basics, the kinds of things you've got to think about. You've got to do about accounting, banking, finance, legal. What I mean by accounting is how are you going to keep track? How are you going to know whether you're winning or losing? How are you going to know whether you're paying your bills back, whether you're on track? All these things are important. There are software applications, Quicken, QuickBooks are examples, but you're going to need an accountant. Just don't even try to do that yourself. Even unless you're maybe starting a business in bookkeeping or accounting. You need an accountant to give you a sort of objective view of how you're doing. Because one thing that all startups and entrepreneurs are sometimes overly optimistic. You're going to need to talk to a lawyer, at least at the beginning, to understand things like what structure. Should I be an LLC? Should I be a C corporation? Should I be a proprietorship? A lot of this is going to be intrinsic. You just have to know it. You got to understand it because you got to protect your investment in yourself. You're also going to want a lawyer to run ideas by about setting up your company, but also following regulations, getting the proper permits, appealing decisions by regulatory boards if such a thing happens, and you're going to want to talk to an insurance agent, a commercial insurance agent. At the very least, you're going to need things like liability insurance. If you have that store, you're going to have to protect yourself in case somebody gets hurt in your store. If you have that landscaping business, and you fall and get hurt, or you damage someone's property, or one of your employees is injured on the job with your equipment, you need to have insurance for that. Even if you're a consultant, a single person consultant, you're going to need something sometimes called errors and omissions insurance, so that if you give advice and someone takes your advice and some bad thing happens, yes, the contracts normally say that's up to them, etc., but you are really taking an extraordinary risk if you don't cover yourself to some extent by having some of those insurances. So that's some of the logistical stuff. You're going to need to figure out a bank, and it's not just like, well, my local checking account is at my credit union. Well, maybe your credit union is the right one, maybe it's not. You're going to understand what banking relationships you're going to need. Is it just to collect funds and disperse them like your home personal checking account? Are you going to look for loans? Are you going to look for financing of equipment? Bear in mind, startups have very low success rate getting bank loans from banks, especially in the current economic environment. Very difficult. So you may have to think of creative strategies to fund your business. And that gets me to the cash flow management, which is something you'll have to worry about and think about probably every day you're in business. Cash is sort of like oxygen to a business. You have to have it, and you have to have it at all times. Generally speaking, you run out of cash, you're out of business. Even if on paper you're profitable, if you sell goods, you incur the expenses, you buy your raw materials, you produce them, and you ship them, and you send them a bill, that on paper you've made a profit. If you don't collect it, you run out of cash, you're out of business. That's a fact of life. So you're going to have to think about cash management strategies. Yet another reason why you need a good CPA accounting firm to manage your finances. You might be doing the billing, you might do the QuickBooks data entry, but your accountant is the expert who will help you sort out what some of those numbers mean. Marketing and sales. Now, there's a course in this program called Sales is Not a Four-Letter Word, because people think of sales as sort of nasty, dirty. When I taught this years ago, I used to ask my students, all right, raise your hand if when you were 8 years old at the dinner table you once said, Daddy, I want to be a salesman when I grow up. If any of you actually raised your hand, I'm guessing the next thing your parents did was take you to a psychiatrist. Rarely do people want to be salesmen, and most people have a sort of a negative impression. Now that's understandable when you realize that for the most part, what do we see as salespeople, as young people and as consumers? Well, car salesmen, real estate salesmen, maybe insurance, fast-talking salesmen who call on the phone at dinner. None of those are particularly admirable, and most people don't aspire to do that. But the reality is that, one, that's not what sales is necessarily about. In fact, taking advantage of people is the sure way to failure, not success. But it's also something that you have to realize that without sales, the greatest business plan in the world, the greatest business, you could be the greatest person, you could be the world's fabulous expert in your little space, but if you can't convince someone to exchange their money for your expertise or products, you don't have a business here, and you'll be out of business and looking for a job or something. So you need to understand that sales is going to be a part of your everyday job. Even if you hire salespeople, you'll have to manage those salespeople, and ultimately the final decisions will be yours. So you have to sort of get used to the idea of selling things, whether your ideas, your products, your services, whatever they might be. Now the reality is most salespeople are critical to the process because they are the information exchange. They're the ones that bring new information about new products that can improve a customer's business to the customers. It's also how they even know you exist. How they know you exist is a function of both sales and what's called marketing. The real difference in sales and marketing is sales is sort of the close, right? It's the conversion, the actual transaction. And marketing is a series of tools, sometimes including advertising, social media, word of mouth, promotions, newspaper ads, radio. There's all kinds of things that go into marketing. It also includes what's called market research or marketing research that you will have done when you are deciding whether to start your business, because you need to understand the size of your market, the average and typical profit margins, what you think you can make, and then you've got to do a good estimate to understand how many of these can I sell, so that you can then add up how many you're going to sell times that margin, the difference between the costs and what you sell it for, to see if it'll cover your ongoing expenses, reimburse you for your fixed expenses and your setup expenses, and support your personal life as well. So marketing is, if you think of it, the big picture. Who do we want to serve? How are we going to let them know that we're here? How are we going to let them know what we are, what we offer, why we're better? And the sales is the actual conversion of that customer interest into an actual closed, bookable sale. Whether that's salesmen going door to door, which is sort of old school 19th, 20th century, but if it's salespeople in your office driving out in the field, if it's marketing, if it's web-based, whatever, however it's sold, distribution, you need to think about that. Distribution is the next thing. When I say distribution, I mean, how do you get the product into the hands of the customer once you've sold it? In the case of my friend with the packaging supply business, what he does is he takes an order, it comes back from the salesman, the person in charge of logistics takes the order, goes out to the warehouse, picks those parts or components that have been sold, bundles them up in a package for customer A, and schedules them to be put on a delivery truck, whether UPS or their own truck, and delivered to the customer in a timely manner so that they can send them a bill and conduct our business. That's sort of logistics and distribution. So in distribution, am I selling this product? Some people never see the product. You sell it and then someone else delivers it. There are a number of companies that will fulfill, it's called, but fulfillment of your orders for you for a fee. And sometimes if you're an independent sales rep for a manufacturer, the manufacturer ships it and quote-unquote fulfills the order that you take and you get your commission. Logistics, as I mentioned a minute ago, how do you physically get it there? Now, if it's a service, logistics is, when do I schedule to go out to that customer's house to mow their lawn or to put a roof on their house or to replace their boiler, if that's what you're doing? Or if it's business to business, when will I deliver that seminar? Will I deliver that seminar over the web? Will I fly to their office? Will I go to ride with their salespeople? Are there handouts to go with this? Is there media to be produced? This is sort of the logistics and distribution aspects of your business. And finally, we'll get to sort of production and or suppliers. And whether you are producing a product, you're building it yourself, or you are buying and reselling, you are going to have suppliers. Whether those suppliers, in the case of, say, my packaging supply friend, again, he sells stretch wrap that you wrap around a pallet. And so he has a handful of relationships with manufacturers of that product. He buys it in a truckload lot of 20 skids of this stuff. Now, he gets a better price because he's buying so much of it. The reality is, I would never want to own 20 skids of stretch wrap because I would never have a need for it. So even if it was a half of the price per unit, I don't need 1,000 units of it. I need one. So I don't mind paying a little extra. And that's what a distributor does. So you have to think about, okay, how many suppliers do I need? What happens if one supplier can't deliver? Do I have a backup supplier? Do I have relationships with those suppliers that they will send me product on credit so that I can then bill it, bill the sales, collect the money, pay my supplier? Or, and this is most likely in a startup, will I have to pay for the supplies in advance until they get to know me and realize I'm a good risk? So that's an idea of production. If I'm manufacturing my own products, if I'm making cuckoo clocks in my little wood shop, and I've got an outsourced contract with Santa, and I have to deliver 50,000 cuckoo clocks by the middle of December, I have to come up with a plan, a process, what's called supply chain, which means how do I make sure that I order enough parts to assemble all those cuckoo clocks? Who's going to build them? How many of them am I going to build per hour so that you can calculate what it's going to cost to assemble them? What kind of packaging am I going to put them in? How am I going to get them to the North Pole? All of these things are the logistics of making it happen. And of course, as we get further into it, in most cases you're going to need some IT. I've heard recently someone say every company is an IT company. Well, that's probably not quite true. But regardless of whether you're a single shingle, one-person consultant, or a bakery, or an ad agency, or a car wash, or whatever it is, chances are you're going to need computers and networks and telephones and that sort of thing. So you're going to need some resources. Typically, unless IT is your core business, you'll farm this out to some local person, at least initially. And if you grow big enough to need your own in-house IT, so be it. The good news is this stuff is way less expensive than it ever has been before, and it's one of the reasons that entrepreneurship like this is even possible. That, sort of in summary, is all the basic logistical stuff that we talked about.